I bought a house without telling my parents, then found out they copied my key, showed up while I was outside, and brought a locksmith when it didn't fit anymore. My name is Lana Carter. I'm 30 years old and currently working as a software engineer at a tech company in Houston, Texas. Whenever I think about my family, I feel both close and distant, like an old scar that still stings whenever it's touched. Throughout my childhood, I was never seen as equal to my sister Vanessa, who is 3 years older than me. My parents constantly put us on a scale of comparison, and that scale never once tipped in my favor. I remember birthdays as if they were etched in stone. When Vanessa turned 11, our backyard came alive with music. Our parents had even hired a live band to perform. Flags and decorations hung bright, tables were filled with sweets, and Vanessa's friends crowded the yard. And there I was, just an 8-year-old girl sitting quietly in a corner, caught between jealousy and sadness, wondering if my parents would ever do the same for me. 3 months later, when my birthday came, instead of a grand celebration, my mother quickly bought a small box of cupcakes from a nearby bakery, placed them on the kitchen table, and snapped a couple of careless photos. There were no friends, no balloons, no party, just her reminder, you should be grateful, because not every child gets a birthday cake like this. Christmas memories weren't any better. I still remember when Vanessa was 13, my father gave her a shiny pink bicycle, the expensive kind my friends often dreamed of having. That whole evening she rode proudly around the neighborhood, her laughter echoing as I sat there at 10 years old, clutching a cheap supermarket doll my mother had bought on discount. It was the only gift I received. Instead of happiness, all I felt was an empty, cold ache inside. My parents showered Vanessa with praise for being a grateful, well-behaved daughter, while all I heard was the same old line. You need to be thankful. Don't compare yourself to your sister. She deserves it because she's more obedient. As I grew older, those comparisons didn't fade. They became the very lens through which my parents saw me. Every one of Vanessa's accomplishments, from school awards to compliments from teachers, was retold proudly to relatives. My achievements, on the other hand, were brushed aside or followed with a remark like, "But she still has a lot of work to do." I learned to smile awkwardly, to stay quiet, to become nothing more than a shadow behind Vanessa. I was never allowed to demand, never allowed to be angry, and above all, I was always told to be grateful. Maybe that's why I carried a silent resentment, a pain I couldn't put into words. And I've never forgotten one thought that felt like a needle stuck in my mind. I was always taught to be grateful, but Vanessa never had to be. That sentence, if it can be called a lesson, shaped not only my childhood but my entire life afterward. It created a wall between my sister and me, and at the same time it planted in me a burning desire that one day, I would break free from that endless cycle, live a life of my own, and never again have to be grateful for things I deserved in the first place. When I turned 18, I made up my mind to break free from my sister's shadow. I studied relentlessly, kept my GPA high, and eventually received my acceptance letter from the University of Texas at Dallas. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, not just because it was a respected university in my home state, but because it felt like my chance to finally prove my own worth. I still remember holding that letter, my hands trembling, tears blurring my eyes. My parents congratulated me, but the joy didn't last long. They immediately turned to Vanessa, who was sitting at the dinner table, and said, "You need to keep studying hard too, so you can be like your sister." Yet even then, their favoritism toward her never wavered. When it came time to prepare for college, I considered staying with Vanessa to save money. At that point, my parents had already rented her a private apartment near her school, covering all her living expenses. I thought if I stayed with her, our parents would be happy knowing we could look out for each other, and it would ease my financial burden. But when I brought it up, Vanessa gave me a calculating look before replying bluntly, "If you want to stay, you'll have to pay me $500 a month for rent and utilities. I'm not going to support you." I froze. My parents knew about it but didn't step in. My mother simply said, "Vanessa has the right to ask that. If you think it's too expensive, you'll need to find your own place." And just like that, I had no choice but to move into the dorm's cramped rooms with 4 people squeezed together. Nothing like the comfort of Vanessa's apartment. My college years were some of the toughest in my life. I studied while working part-time at a Barnes & Noble downtown, taking evening and weekend shifts just to make ends meet. I became intimately familiar with the taste of $1 instant noodles, eating them so often that just smelling them made my throat tighten. My friends could afford Starbucks every morning, buying brand new textbooks, while I scoured online for used copies and picked up every extra shift I could to cover tuition. On nights when I finished work late, I would sit on the bus ride back to my dorm, my head leaning against the cold window in exhaustion, but I still forced myself to pull out a textbook and read a few more pages. Meanwhile, Vanessa was living a completely different life. My parents not only paid for her apartment, but also covered her tuition and every one of her living expenses. Whenever I visited, her refrigerator was always overflowing with food, while mine back at the dorm barely held a few packs of instant noodles and a bottle of water. Each time I saw the difference, a painful sense of imbalance hit me, one my parents never acknowledged. They always excused it by saying, "Vanessa needs more support because she's the eldest. You're stronger and can handle things on your own." But deep down, I knew it was nothing more than an excuse to justify their favoritism. That was how I lived through my 4 years of college. I studied day and night, taking on every job I could find, working in bookstores, serving coffee, wrapping gifts during the holidays. I paid every cent of my expenses myself, never receiving more than a few token gifts from my parents. There were days I thought I couldn't go on, but inside me burned a determination. I would succeed. I would prove that I could stand on my own, without anyone's pity or handouts. 4 years eventually passed. I graduated with a degree in computer science, earning a 3.9 GPA, a result so strong that even my professors praised me. Holding my diploma in my hands, I felt both emotional and proud. I thought back to the sleepless nights, the meager meals, the exhausting late shifts, and the endless unfair comparisons I had endured. None of it had broken me. On the contrary, it had forged me into someone who could stand firmly on her own 2 feet. After graduation, I decided to return to the Energy Corridor in Houston to begin a new chapter, a place full of opportunities in the tech field where I wanted to contribute to my hometown. I was hired by a software company with a starting salary that wasn't high compared to industry standards, but for a girl who had lived on instant noodles for 4 years, it felt like a monumental step forward. I rented a small 1-bedroom apartment near downtown. It was old and cramped, but it gave me something priceless, a space of my own, free from sharing, and free from the constant, familiar sting of my parents' words. I lived a simple life. I cut down every expense I possibly could, no new clothes unless absolutely necessary, cooking at home instead of eating out, even teaching myself how to fix small things around the apartment rather than calling a handyman. I opened a separate savings account and set a strict goal to put away at least $600 each month, even if it meant turning down nights out with coworkers or skipping short trips with friends. I had lived through years of scarcity as a student, when I had to weigh a coin in my hand just to decide if I could afford a single can of soda. Because of that, I became even more determined to build a strong foundation for myself so that I would never again have to depend on anyone. While I was focused on building my own life, Vanessa married Ethan. He was ambitious but lacked persistence, bouncing from one job to another, sometimes unemployed for months at a time. They quickly had 2 children, Max and Noah, only 2 years apart. From the outside, it looked like Vanessa had a picture-perfect family: husband, kids, a house our parents had co-signed and paid the mortgage for, and their unconditional support. But anyone who looked closely could see that Ethan provided no stability, and Vanessa leaned on our parents to fill every financial gap. I still remember one phone call home when my mother sighed and told me Ethan had lost his job again, credit card debt piling high, and as if on cue, my father dipped into his savings to cover it all. Another time, Vanessa's car broke down on the freeway. My mother called me in the middle of my workday not to ask for help, but just to brag. "Your dad rushed straight out there, hired a tow truck, and paid for the entire repair." I could only force a weak smile, though inside I felt a bitter confusion. When I was away at college, my old car broke down more times than I could count. I had to handle it alone, calling Uber to get to work, skipping meals so I could afford a new set of tires. My parents never offered to help. All they said was, "You need to learn how to take care of yourself." But when it came to Vanessa, everything was different. It wasn't just about money. My parents also became the unwilling babysitters for my 2 nephews. They were constantly running back and forth between their house and Vanessa's, taking care of Max and Noah, often skipping family gatherings I had looked forward to. The day I told them I'd received my very first promotion, they barely listened before cutting me off so they could gush about how Max sang in preschool and the teacher praised him. At the rare dinners where I was present, the conversation always revolved around the kids, while I sat there like an outsider just listening. I was jealous, of course, but more than that, I felt a deep, lingering bitterness. I had worked twice, even 3 times as hard to build a career of my own, but in my parents' eyes, nothing I achieved seemed to matter as much as the fact that Vanessa had children. I was the daughter who had to be independent, the one burdened with the responsibility of not bothering the family, while Vanessa was the daughter who needed protection and support. There were nights I sat alone in my tiny apartment, staring at my steadily growing savings account. I felt proud, yes, but also incredibly lonely. I knew I was on the right path, yet I also knew that to my parents, I would always be nothing more than a shadow trailing behind Vanessa. Still, I never fought back or argued. I didn't want to waste time on a battle whose outcome was already decided. I chose silence, swallowing my hurt and pouring all my energy into work. I told myself, one day, everything I've built will stand as the clearest proof. I don't need anyone's recognition, as long as I know I've done it. That belief kept me standing tall, step by step, building my savings for the most important decision of my life, buying a home of my own, a house no one else could ever claim. After a few years of working, the strain of renting started to weigh on me. At first, living in a small 1-bedroom apartment felt fine. I had freedom, my own space, no interference. But the longer it went on, the more I realized how temporary it all was, paying over $1,000 each month, only to be left with nothing but receipts. I looked at my savings book thickening year after year, thought of all the sleepless nights at work and the cold-packed lunches I ate just to save money, and I knew I deserved more than this. I needed a place that was truly mine, a home I could call my own, not just another stop along the way. The thought of buying a house started as a small spark and then grew into something I couldn't ignore. But I didn't want to buy in the city center. Houston was noisy, the housing prices were sky-high, and most of all, I had never felt truly connected to it. I didn't want to move back in with my parents, but I also didn't want to cut ties completely. That's when I looked toward Katy, a quiet suburb not far from Houston, with a friendly community and a calmer pace of life. It was close enough that I could drive back to Houston in under an hour if I needed to, but far enough that my parents couldn't just drop by whenever they pleased. To me, that was a safe distance close enough to my roots, but still giving me the independence I longed for. I decided to keep everything an absolute secret. I didn't tell my parents, and I certainly didn't tell Vanessa. I knew that the moment they found out I was buying a house, it would immediately turn into the family's house, a place where Vanessa might move in, or where my parents could pressure me into saving a room for the kids. I didn't want to hear one more time the words, "You need to think of your sister, think of the little ones." For the first time in my life, I wanted to do something completely for myself, no permission, no aprovao, no compromises. So I started searching. Every evening after work, I sat in front of my laptop scrolling through dozens, sometimes hundreds, of listings in Katy. I calculated everything in detail, how much space I really needed, what price matched my savings, the commute back to my office in Houston. After weeks of searching, I found it a small, single-story 2-bedroom house with a wooden porch in front, and a backyard big enough for me to plant lavender, the flower I had loved since college. The kitchen was bathed in natural light, with a large window overlooking the yard, where I pictured myself sitting with a cup of coffee on quiet mornings while working. The first time I walked through the door, my heart pounded as if I had just stumbled upon the missing piece of my life. I knew then this was where I wanted to begin a new chapter. I handled every step with complete discretion. I contacted the bank, finalized the loan paperwork, and signed the contract without breathing a word to anyone except my financial advisor. I didn't even share the news with my closest friends in Houston, afraid that one slip of the tongue might come back to hurt me. The more silent I stayed, the safer I felt. But life has a way of refusing to let things remain as private as we wish. At the office, there was a coworker I already knew to be nosy. Her name was Linda. One afternoon during lunch break, I absent-mindedly opened an email from my realtor to double-check some paperwork. Linda was sitting right next to me. She caught a glimpse of my screen and immediately leaned in, firing questions. "Are you buying a house? Where at? Oh my God, that's amazing." I quickly shut my laptop and brushed it off with a few vague answers. But with Linda, even the smallest detail was enough to spin into a whole story. Just a few days later, I overheard another coworker saying that Linda had been telling everyone in the office that I was looking to buy a house in Houston. My stomach dropped. Sure enough, not long after, my mother called. Her voice was cheerful but laced with that probing tone I knew too well. "I heard you're looking for a house in Houston? Why didn't you tell me? You need to get something bigger, with plenty of room so the kids can stay too. A 2-bedroom won't be enough." I froze, wondering how the news had traveled so fast. I tried to deny it, insisting it was just a rumor and that I hadn't decided anything yet, but I could clearly hear Vanessa in the background, her voice brimming with certainty as if the decision had already been made. "If you do buy, make sure it has a big backyard. Max loves soccer, and Noah will need his own room. Ethan also needs space for an office." I sat there in silence, phone pressed to my ear, my blood boiling. My private dream had just been dragged into the open, and once again my family was ready to turn it into something for Vanessa and her children. Inside me, two conflicting feelings collided. On one hand, I was furious at myself for being careless, for letting Linda find out, for allowing my secret to slip. On the other hand, something became painfully clear. I couldn't hesitate anymore. I couldn't let anyone else define or claim my dream. I had to move faster, had to lock down this house before it was transformed into the so-called family home I never wanted. And in that tension, I began preparing for the next steps, the steps that would completely change the course of my life. From the moment after that phone call, my life slipped into a relentless storm with no room to breathe. Every morning when I opened my eyes, my phone was already filled with unread messages from my mother. The content was always the same, only the links changed. "Look at this one. 4 bedrooms, safe neighborhood, close to your sister's house. Perfect for the family." By noon, just as I stepped out of a meeting at work, my phone would buzz again non-stop. My mother would send me another batch of listings, houses with 5 or 6 bedrooms, each one annotated with her notes. "This one has a backyard big enough for family parties, with separate rooms for the kids. You need to think long-term, it'll be convenient later." By the time I dragged myself home at night, exhausted and not even fed, I'd be met with a 30-minute call where her voice left no space for mine. "You're an adult now, you have to take care of the whole family. Vanessa struggles with 2 little kids, Ethan's job isn't stable, and if you can help, you must. That's your duty as a younger sister." Every day felt like standing in the middle of a hurricane. My personal email, text messages, even Facebook Messenger flooded with links to houses advertised as dream family home or perfect house for raising kids. My mother even went as far as calling a realtor in Houston, pulling photos of houses and sending them to me with notes like, "She says this one's on discount. If you agree, I'll book a tour right away. Don't let this opportunity pass." Reading those messages, I couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. Everything was being decided for me, while I, the one paying, the one signing, the one who would shoulder the mortgage for decades, was treated like nothing more than a side character in their plan. And Vanessa? She didn't hesitate for a second. She messaged me directly on iMessage, her tone more like a command than a suggestion. "Check out this one. It has a basement for Ethan's office and a pool in the backyard for the kids. Max loves swimming, he'd be thrilled. You need to consider the boys too." She didn't ask if I wanted any of it, she spoke as if my buying a house was only to meet her family's needs. I stared at her words, my hands trembling with fury. For 30 years, every sacrifice had been mine. And even now, when I had finally clawed my way to the point of buying my own home, they still assumed it belonged to everyone else, a home for Vanessa to benefit from yet again. That was when I began to see it more clearly than ever. In my parents' eyes, this house wasn't the result of my years of struggle and discipline. To them, it was simply another opportunity to provide more for Vanessa. They didn't see me. They didn't see the years I lived on cheap noodles, the nights I nearly collapsed from exhaustion at work, or the sacrifices I made to save every dollar. The only things they chose to see were their 2 grandchildren, their eldest daughter, and her failing husband, the family they always expected me to carry on my back. From that phone call on, my days stopped having even a moment of peace. Every morning when I woke up, my phone was already full of unread messages from my mother. The content was nearly identical, the only difference being the link attached. "Take a look at this one. 4 bedrooms, safe neighborhood, close to your sister's place. Perfect for the family." By noon, just as I stepped out of a meeting, my phone would buzz non-stop again. My mother would send me another long list of houses, 5 to 6 bedrooms this time, with comments like, "This one has a backyard big enough for family parties, and separate rooms for the kids. You need to think ahead, it'll be more convenient later." When I came home at night, tired and not even fed yet, I'd face another 30-minute call, her voice leaving me no chance to speak. "You're an adult now, you have to look out for the whole family. Vanessa is struggling with 2 kids, Ethan's job isn't stable, and if you can help, you must. That's your duty as the younger sister." Every day felt like living in the center of a storm. My personal email, my texts, even Facebook Messenger were flooded with links to houses with flashy titles like Dream Family Home or Perfect House for Raising Kids. My mother even went so far as to call a realtor in Houston, collect pictures of listings, and send them to me with the note. She says this one's on sale. As soon as you agree, I'll book a showing. Don't miss the opportunity. Reading those messages, I didn't know whether to laugh or choke back tears. Everything was being decided on my behalf, while I, the one putting down the money, signing the paperwork, carrying the mortgage, was treated like nothing more than a supporting character in their plan. And Vanessa? She didn't even pretend to be subtle. She texted me directly on iMessage, her tone sounding more like an order. "Check this one out. It has a basement for Ethan's office and a pool in the backyard for the kids. Max loves swimming, he'd be thrilled. You really need to consider them too." She didn't ask me whether I wanted the house. She spoke as though my purchase existed solely to serve her family's needs. I stared at those words, my hands trembling with anger. For 30 years, every sacrifice had been mine. And even now, when I finally had the strength to buy a home of my own, they still treated it as if it were communal property, a roof under which Vanessa would once again reap the benefits. It hit me more clearly than ever. In my parents' eyes, this house wasn't the fruit of my years of effort and sacrifice. To them, it was nothing more than an opportunity to provide for Vanessa. They didn't see me. They didn't see the years I survived on cheap noodles, the nights I nearly collapsed from exhaustion, or the determination it took to keep going. All they chose to see were their 2 grandchildren, their eldest daughter, and her failing husband, the family they always expected me to shoulder on my back. I no longer hesitated. After weeks of tension filled with my mother's relentless calls and Vanessa's demanding messages, I finally signed the papers for the 2-bedroom house in Katy. The process was quiet, just me, the realtor, and the bank officer. There were no parents by my side, no one cheering for me, no family photo to mark the moment. But for me, it was the very first time I felt truly grown, truly in control of my own life. I moved in on a bright, sunny day. When the door swung open, I took a deep breath, inhaling the faint scent of old wood mixed with the warmth of sunlight lingering in the rooms. In front of me was a modest living room with pale wooden floors and a large window that let the light pour in. I sat down on an old wooden chair the previous owner had left behind, and it felt as though the sunlight itself was embracing me, gentle and warm. I had lived in damp dorm rooms, in overpriced apartments that never felt like mine. But here, the moment I stepped in, I knew I had finally found a place that deserved to be called home. I wandered out onto the front porch. It was small, made of wood, just big enough to hold a swing chair. I pictured myself there on late afternoons, sipping tea while watching neighbors walk their dogs. Out back was a modest yard, not too big, but perfect for the little dream I had carried for years, planting lavender. I had always loved the soft stretch of purple and its sweet fragrance, a reminder that even in a life filled with bitterness, I still deserved a corner of peace for myself. The kitchen, though, was what I loved most. A wide window opened to the backyard, letting the morning light flood every corner. I imagined myself cooking breakfast there, the aroma of fresh coffee blending with golden sunlight so different from the rushed meals eaten at my desk in that old apartment. Just standing there, with my hand on the marble countertop, I could feel the difference in my bones. This was no longer a temporary life. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one I owned completely. I walked through each room, running my fingers along the walls and door frames, as if I needed to make sure it all truly belonged to me. The master bedroom was just big enough for a queen bed, while the smaller room, I decided, would become my reading room. I had always dreamed of a space filled with books, where I could sink into an armchair and read whatever I wanted without anyone mocking me for being impractical or wasting time. Just the thought of it made the corners of my mouth lift into a smile. Standing in the middle of the living room, I whispered to myself, for the first time, I'm doing something only for me. Not to please my parents, not to ease Vanessa's burdens, not to meet anyone else's expectations, just for me. The words echoed in the stillness, and my eyes stung with tears. My whole life I had been forced to be grateful, to sacrifice, to step aside, and now here I was, standing inside my very own house, where I was the only voice that mattered. On some evenings, I would sit alone on the porch, listening to crickets in the garden, feeling the warm breeze run through my hair. I closed my eyes and thought about the upcoming family dinner. I knew my parents and Vanessa would talk, would impose, would try to claim space in my life again. But this time, I was carrying a bomb to shatter the false silence that had lasted for years. I would tell them outright that I had bought a house, and that it was mine, only mine. I would look them straight in the eye and not back down. Inside me was both fear and anticipation. Fear, because I knew the confrontation would be fierce. Anticipation, because this was the first time I was stepping out of the cycle of sacrifice. When I closed the front door that evening, the keys gripped tight in my hand, I felt a small fire ignite in my chest. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least I had taken the right first step. That night, I drove back to Houston with a heart both tense and resolute. My parents had texted earlier, reminding me that the whole family would be at dinner, Vanessa, Ethan, and the kids. I knew it would be anything but simple, but I also knew it was time to speak the truth. I couldn't keep the house in Katy a secret forever, and I couldn't let them keep believing that my dream was just a shelter for the entire family. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I repeated to myself the words I was going to say. This is my house, and it's only for me. My parents' house looked exactly the same as it always had, the front yard shaded by old oak trees, the familiar golden light spilling out from the windows. When I stepped into the dining room, the scene was lively and loud. Vanessa was laughing, holding up her iPad to show everyone pictures of a new house. My father sat beside her, his face full of excitement, while my mother nodded approvingly, chiming in now and then with praise. Look at this one, Lana. My mother turned toward me. 5 bedrooms, even a playroom for the kids. Close to good schools too. Now this is the right choice. I took my seat quietly and listened. Vanessa carried on, her eyes glowing with excitement. If you buy this one, Max can have his own room, Noah too. Ethan could use the garage as a workshop, and the living room is big enough for us to host Christmas for the whole family. You need to think about it, this will be our home, not just yours. Everyone at the table nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I held my glass of water, sat in silence for a long moment, then drew in a deep breath. It was time. I set the glass down and spoke calmly but firmly. I've already bought a house. The room fell silent in an instant. I looked my parents straight in the eye and continued, in Katy, a 2-bedroom, and it's only for me. The air cracked like glass. Vanessa practically screamed, What? 2 bedrooms? Where are the kids supposed to stay? What were you thinking, Lana? Do you expect them to squeeze into the living room? My mother slammed her spoon against the table, her face flushed red. You are unbelievably selfish. Your sister has a family, children to care for, and you refuse to help? And you dare to think only of yourself? Shameful. My father's voice dropped low, his eyes heavy with judgment. Family means sacrifice. You're the younger sister. It's your duty to support your elder sister. That's only natural. I felt a surge of fury rise inside me. For years I had been shackled by the same refrain. You must be grateful, you must sacrifice, until it became a chain around my neck. I placed both hands firmly on the table, stared straight at them, and my voice came out sharper than it had ever been. Sacrifice does not mean I am bound to carry her for the rest of my life. I have the right to live for myself. I worked endlessly, year after year, to afford this house, and it belongs to no one but me. Ethan, who had been silent beside Vanessa until now, suddenly sneered. I thought family was about sharing. What's the point of having a house if not for everyone to enjoy? I turned toward him, my eyes locking on his. Have you ever given a single dollar to my parents? Have you ever once helped me through my struggles? Don't lecture me about sharing when all you've ever done is take. His face flushed red, and he dropped his gaze, but Vanessa shot up in his place, screaming, You've really changed, Lana. You've become cold, selfish, unrecognizable. Do you even think about everything Mom and Dad have done for you? I let out a bitter laugh. Done for me? When I had to pay for my own dorm? When I lived off instant noodles every single day while you had every expense covered? Was that them doing something for me? I've had enough. Myson? My mother shot to her feet, her hand trembling as she pointed at me. If you turn your back on this family, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. What will people say? They'll say we raised an ungrateful daughter. I met her gaze, my words deliberate and unshaken. I don't care what people say anymore. I care what I say to myself. and I say it's time I lived my own life. The silence that followed pressed down on the dining room like the air before a storm. My heart pounded in my chest, but with it came a strange, spreading lightness. I pushed my chair back and stood. My parents' eyes were still burning with anger. Vanessa sat stunned, speechless. I picked up my purse and walked slowly toward the door. Before leaving, I turned back one last time, my voice steady and final. This is my decision. I will not change it. If you cannot accept that, then consider me never part of your family plans again. I sang. I stepped out of the house where I had grown up, the place that held both sweet and bitter memories. The door shut behind me with a heavy thud, echoing like a final period at the end of years of sacrifice and endurance. Standing in the yard, I drew in a long breath of Houston's hot, humid air, and for the first time in my life, I felt I had done something right for myself. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least I had stood up, spoken out, and refused to carry the weight of someone else's life any longer. And that was the first step toward breaking free of Vanessa's shadow, toward beginning a new journey, one where I would no longer be the forgotten name in the family, but simply myself, Lana Carter. After that dinner, I knew I had put myself at odds with my family, but I hadn't expected the backlash to come so fast or so fierce. The very next morning, when I opened my phone, it felt like all of Houston had exploded over a Facebook post from Vanessa. Her page was filled with photos of Max and Noah, crammed together on a tiny bunk bed, their faces downcast, paired with a caption dripping in self-pity. It's heartbreaking when someone in the family doesn't value kinship. Some people only think of themselves, while children are left to suffer. The post spread like wildfire, shared dozens of times within hours, gathering floods of sympathetic comments. Those poor kids. Family comes first. How could anyone be so cruel? I read it with a bitter laugh caught in my throat, because of course the someone in the family she meant was me. And it didn't stop there. My mother jumped in too. She posted a photo of the very house I had just bought in Katy. Somehow she had gotten it from the realtor's listing, and wrote a caption that cut like a knife. Some people forget their roots, forget their family, just to chase their own selfishness. Her words stabbed straight at me, and the effect was immediate. Old acquaintances in Houston, even distant relatives, began calling and messaging me, questioning me, scolding me. None of them cared to hear my side of the story. Just reading the dramatic words of my mother and Vanessa was enough for them to brand me ungrateful, selfish, and cold. At work, the storm followed me. I could hear the whispers whenever I walked into the office. A friendly coworker leaned close one morning and whispered, "Linda's been telling the whole group that you're fighting with your family just because you refused to buy a bigger house for the kids. She even said you must be really wealthy, otherwise you wouldn't be so selfish." My face burned. So Linda, the one who had accidentally seen my email, had now turned into the source of a twisted rumor spreading through my workplace. I walked past the rows of desks with my head held high, but inside I was boiling with anger and humiliation. I started blocking accounts on Facebook, changed my phone number, even deleted Messenger altogether to shut out the barrage of attacks. Still, the weight of worry pressed on me. I knew my family would not stop at online complaints. They had never known when to stop. And sure enough, less than a week later, my mother showed up at my doorstep in Katy, holding a pie in her hands. She smiled with a softness I hadn't seen in years, as if everything that had happened was just a minor misunderstanding. "I just want to talk, Lana," she said, her voice so gentle that a few years ago, I probably would have caved on the spot. I let her in, set the pie on the kitchen counter. The smell of apple pie filled the air, tugging me back to childhood Christmases, when Vanessa and I would wait for our parents to slice it. But the sweetness evaporated the moment my mother began to circle toward her real purpose. "I know things got a little tense last week," she started carefully. "I'm sorry if we made you upset, but you know, Vanessa really is struggling. Ethan's job is still unstable, and the kids are growing fast. Your house is spacious, why not let your sister and the kids stay with you for a while, just until they get through this rough patch?" I looked straight into her eyes and didn't answer right away. I had known this moment would come, just not this soon. "Mom," I finally said, my voice calm but cold. "I bought this house with years of my hard work and savings. It's not a temporary shelter for anyone. If Vanessa and her husband are struggling, they need to figure it out themselves. I can't carry them forever." Her face stiffened, but she forced a smile, trying to cover her disappointment. "You sound so harsh. We're family, not strangers." I just want you to see that sharing a little doesn't cost anything. I placed my hand firmly on the table and spoke each word with weight. You call it sharing. I call it manipulation. I've sacrificed enough over the years, and now I will not allow anyone, not even you, to make decisions for me anymore. In that moment, I saw with piercing clarity what I had only ever sensed faintly before. Every action, from shaming me online, spreading rumors at work, to showing up with a pie and a sweet apology, was nothing more than a carefully calculated chain of manipulation. My family had never wanted to hear my true voice. They only wanted to force me into the role they expected, the younger sister, the daughter who was supposed to sacrifice for her older sibling and her children. When my mother left that day, the pie still sat on the kitchen counter, cold and unnecessary, just like the false apology she had carried with it. I watched her silhouette fade beyond the door, and inside me rose an ironclad resolve. This was no longer about petty disagreements. This was a battle, and I was not going to retreat. The very next day, I only meant to stop at the supermarket to pick up some vegetables and a few cartons of milk for the week ahead. I never imagined that by the time I came back, my whole world would be turned upside down. From a distance, as soon as I turned onto the narrow street leading to my house, I saw Vanessa's silver SUV parked squarely in front of my door. My stomach dropped with a sickening sense of dread. Slowly, I pulled over to the curb, my eyes fixed on the house. The curtains shifted, just slightly, and I knew without a doubt someone was inside. I hurried up the porch steps, unlocked the door with my key, and the sight that met me made my blood run cold. My living room was in chaos, boxes shoved around, furniture out of place. Max and Noah were running wild, toys scattered across the floor, shrieking and laughing as if it were their own home. Vanessa stood in the center of the room, directing Ethan as he hauled in large bags, while she herself fussed with unpacking a suitcase. Ethan, completely unfazed, had dropped onto my sofa with a sandwich in hand, chewing like he was lounging in his own living room. I could hardly believe my eyes. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. Vanessa turned, not the slightest trace of guilt on her face, just a shrug. "Mom gave us the key. We thought about it, this house suits my family better. You don't need all this space living alone." Ethan chimed in between bites, his words muffled with food. "Yeah, it's a good spot. Close to the school, backyard's great for the kids. You should be glad you're helping out your family." My head buzzed, as if it were about to split. All the sweat and years of saving, all the sacrifices I had made, were suddenly reduced to nothing more than a convenient place for them to move into. I gripped my house key so tightly it dug into my palm, drew in a deep breath to steady myself, and pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police right now. This is my house, and you have no right to be here." Vanessa let out a dry laugh, as if I were bluffing. "Oh, come on, Lana, don't be dramatic. This is family. Who calls the cops on their own sister and nephews?" I locked eyes with her, pressed the call button, and spoke clearly into the line. "I'd like to report a trespassing. The address is..." My family entered my house without permission and are refusing to leave. The room snapped tight with tension. Ethan shot to his feet, his face flushed red. "You actually called the cops? Are you insane?" Vanessa's expression hardened, her voice rising into a shrill pitch. "What will the whole neighborhood think when they see you dragging the police here to throw out your own sister and her kids? You'll make a fool of yourself." 1. I was shaking, but my voice rose louder than the pounding of my heart. "I don't care what anyone else thinks. I care what I think, and I think you've crossed the line." 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up in front of the house. Curious neighbors peeked through their curtains. 2 officers stepped inside, their eyes sweeping over the chaos in the living room. I pointed directly at Vanessa and Ethan. "They are not allowed to be here. The deed and mortgage are under my name." They refused to leave when I asked. Vanessa immediately burst into tears, clutching her boys dramatically to her chest. "Officer, we're just family. My sister is heartless, she wants to throw her own nephews out on the street." Ethan raised his voice, defiant. "This is a family matter, you don't need to get involved." But I was ready. I handed over the closing documents, the mortgage papers, and said firmly, "I am the sole legal owner." They entered using a key they were not authorized to have. "I am asking that they leave immediately." One of the officers nodded and turned to Vanessa. "Ma'am, if you do not leave, we will have to proceed under the law regarding unlawful entry." Vanessa's eyes flashed with rage, but under the weight of the neighbor's stares gathering at the porch, she reluctantly began packing up. Ethan cursed under his breath, scooping Noah into his arms, while Max, pouting, kicked one of my boxes on the way out. The door closed behind them, leaving the living room in chaos. I stood there, shaking with adrenaline, but inside me rose a wave of release. I had done something I never thought I'd have the courage to do: confront them, call the police, and stand my ground. For the first time in my life, I no longer cared what other people would think. The only thing that mattered was what I thought, and I knew I was right. The very next morning, I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house replaced. I installed a full security system, cameras around the property, a video doorbell, window sensors. I wasn't going to let anyone, not even family, step into my life again without my permission. I kept the police report, photographed the mess they left behind, and filed everything neatly in a folder. I knew this battle was far from over. That afternoon, I called David, a college friend who was now a civil attorney. He listened calmly as I recounted everything, his voice steady. "Lana, what you went through is unlawful entry. You need a formal legal warning immediately. I'll draft a cease and desist letter for your parents and Vanessa. If they try this again, you'll be in a position to sue." Sitting in my living room, looking out at the small garden, my chest tightened. I had never imagined having to drag my parents and sister into legal territory, but I also knew that if I didn't, they would keep crossing every boundary I tried to set. When David sent me the draft, I read each cold, precise line. Any acts of trespass, occupation, or harassment will be considered violations of the law. Any recurrence will result in legal action. I printed it out, set it on the table, my fingers trembling. But then a strange sensation came over me: relief. For the first time, I had a formal shield protecting my freedom. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the streetlight spill across the yard, the evening breeze brushing against my skin. I remembered the moment the police escorted Vanessa and her family out in front of the neighbors. Yes, I had been embarrassed, shaken to my core, but above all, I had stood up, and in that moment, I knew one thing for certain: I would never again return to being the grateful, self-sacrificing shadow they expected me to be. After the police showed up at my door, I thought things would finally calm down, at least for a while, but I was naive to believe my family would know when to stop. They couldn't accept defeat, and they certainly couldn't accept that I had drawn a clear boundary. Instead of backing off, they launched a new campaign, subtler, more insidious, and far more dangerous than barging into my house. It started when I noticed I hadn't received any mail from the bank for weeks. I called customer service to check, and what the representative told me left me frozen. "Your correspondence has been redirected to your updated address, your parents' home." My blood rushed to my face. Who gave them the right to tamper with something so critical? The representative explained that someone claiming to be my mother had called, confirming that I'd moved back, and requesting all documents be forwarded to the Houston address. It took me nearly a week of paperwork and verification to fix the mess, but the violation gnawed at me. I could no longer dismiss this as family drama. This was sabotage. Before I could even breathe, another blow came. I received an email from the HOA, informing me that someone had filed a complaint accusing me of running an illegal business out of my home, using the property for an unauthorized online service. I laughed bitterly. I was a software engineer, occasionally working from home, and yet somehow I had been painted as a lawbreaker in my own neighborhood. I had to draft a lengthy written statement, attach my employment contract, and a company letter, just to prove I wasn't running any business from my house. Eventually, the HOA dismissed the complaint, but I knew exactly who was behind it. The phrasing in the email echoed my mother's voice word for word: "We don't want anyone looking down on this neighborhood." Reading it sent a chill down my spine. Vanessa delivered the next blow. One afternoon, while scrolling online, I froze at the sight of my house plastered all over a GoFundMe page. The bold headline screamed, "Housing crisis, help my kids have a home." Beneath it was a photo of Max and Noah huddled together on a front step, with a gut-wrenching caption, "My sister abandoned us. She bought a big house but won't let her family live with her. Please help my children have a proper home." I recognized it instantly. The photo had been taken right from my own porch. They weren't just slandering me. They were using images of my property as a prop for begging money. I immediately contacted GoFundMe's legal team, submitted copies of my deed, and attached the cease and desist letter David had already drafted. Within 24 hours, the campaign vanished. But the fallout lingered. Old friends from Houston messaged me with pity, and some even sneered, "How could you leave your own nephews homeless?" I began to feel surrounded on all sides. From the bank, the HOA, to social media, everywhere I turned, there were fingerprints of their interference. I spent night after night sleepless, flinching at every small noise outside the yard. I added more locks, more cameras, but no security device could erase the gnawing unease. I knew the truth. The ones harassing me weren't strangers, but the very people who once called me family. The breaking point came late one night when I checked my voicemail. My father's voice came through, hoarse and venomous, half angry, half triumphant. "You think you've won? Don't think moving out of Houston means you're safe. We've planned to move into that house for a long time, whether you agree or not. Now you've embarrassed your mother, humiliated this family. I swear, I won't let you live in peace." I replayed the message again and again, each time feeling like a hand was tightening around my chest. They weren't even pretending anymore. All my life, I'd been made to feel ungrateful if I refused to sacrifice. But now, they themselves had admitted the truth. It had never been about love, only about a plan, a scheme to turn my hard work into Vanessa's gain. I saved the recording and sent it to David. His reply was short but firm. "Good. This is the evidence we need. Don't delete it. And don't let fear push you backward." Holding the phone in my hand, I felt something strange pain. Yes, but also resolve. I knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time in my life, I had proof of what I had always felt. The so-called sacrifice they praised was nothing more than a mask for greed and endless favoritism. I sat down, opened my laptop, and began documenting everything from the very beginning. From the day Linda exposed my house search, to the relentless pressure, to the break-in, and now the subtle smear tactics. I titled the file, "Evidence, the Battle for Freedom." That night, instead of fear, I felt an eerie calm. If they wanted to turn this into a war, then I would no longer retreat. And this time, I wouldn't fight with just emotions. I would fight with truth, with the law, and with every ounce of strength I had been quietly building all these years. The big family meeting was scheduled at my parents' old house in Houston on a sweltering Sunday afternoon. From early morning, my phone buzzed non-stop with messages. "You must come, Lana. We need to resolve this in front of Grandma, your aunt, and all your cousins. Don't you dare be absent." I read the texts with a cold smile. For 30 years, every time they said, "Resolve family matters," it had always meant one thing: forcing me to surrender. But this time, I was walking in armed. When I stepped inside, the living room was already packed. My grandmother sat in her armchair in the corner, her face etched with worry. Aunt Martha leaned in to whisper with one of my cousins, while the others watched in heavy silence. My father stood in the center of the room, his expression severe, my mother seated at his side. Vanessa lounged on the sofa, eyes red and puffy, as if she had spent the entire day crying for sympathy. On the coffee table, my father had laid out a thick stack of papers, no doubt the story they had prepared, carefully crafted to paint me as the traitor of the family. He began with a voice full of theatrics. "Everyone here knows we're going through a difficult time. Vanessa and Ethan, with their 2 little ones, don't have a stable home. Meanwhile, Lana bought a house but refuses to share it. We've called you here to witness the truth. After all the years we raised her, supported her, gave her everything, she has forgotten her roots, abandoned her sister, and turned her back on her own blood." Len. My mother chimed in, her voice trembling for effect. "I've sacrificed so much for her, and now she even called the police to throw us out of her house. Tell me, what kind of daughter does that to her own parents?" Vanessa didn't miss her cue either. She burst into sobs, burying her face in her hands. "I just wanted my children to have a decent place to sleep, but my sister is cruel and selfish. I don't understand how she can live with herself." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. I caught Aunt Martha's doubtful stare, saw a few cousins shaking their heads in disappointment. I knew that if I let this charade continue, I'd once again become the shadow they'd painted me into, the ungrateful daughter, the one who never thought of her family. I drew in a deep breath, then set my document bag on the table and unzipped it. "I have a story too," I said, my voice steady but carrying across the entire room. "And this one is based on truth, not rehearsed lines." I handed out copies of financial records to my grandmother and Aunt Martha. These prove that through 4 years of college, I paid my own dorm rent and all expenses, while Vanessa's tuition, private apartment, and living costs were fully covered by our parents. The room fell silent. I opened my laptop and hit play on a clip from my security cameras. On the screen, my mother and Vanessa appeared outside my Katy house, fumbling with keys, even bringing a locksmith to break in. My grandmother covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Aunt Martha stared in shock. A few cousins gasped aloud. "Oh my God!" But I wasn't finished. I pulled out my phone, tapped a file, and let my father's voicemail blast into the room. "You think you've won? Don't think moving out of Houston means you're safe. We've planned to move into that house for a long time, whether you agree or not." His furious voice cut through the air like a knife, so heavy it smothered every sound in the room. Now every pair of eyes shifted to my parents. No one was looking at me as the traitor anymore. Grandma was the first to break the silence. Her voice trembled, but it carried a sharp edge of fury. "How could you do this to her?" I watched with my own eyes how hard she worked, how she stood on her own from such a young age, and you still pushed her like this? Aunt Martha held the stack of papers in her hands and shook her head. Forcing one child to carry an entire other family on her back isn't sacrifice, it's exploitation. This is beyond cruel. The cousins and relatives began murmuring too, but this time their whispers cut toward my parents and Vanessa. No one was defending them anymore. The air in the room grew so thick it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. But I wasn't about to let them drag it on. I pulled out a copy of the sales contract for my house and held it high for everyone to see. "I've already made my decision. I'm selling the house in Katy. I've accepted a new job in Arizona, and I'm leaving. This is my new life, one that begins without the chains of this family binding me anymore." Grandma's eyes brimmed with tears, but there was pride shining through them. Aunt Martha gave a small nod, and a few relatives clapped softly in quiet support. My parents and Vanessa sat frozen, their entire scheme stripped bare under the light, with not a single ally left. I gathered my documents, stood tall, and said, "My story ends here. Whether you choose to believe the truth or continue clinging to illusions, that's up to you. But I've already chosen." I turned and walked out, leaving the chaos behind me. This time, no one reached out to stop me. I never thought that day would come so quickly. After the family meeting in Houston, I contacted my realtor and officially listed the Katy house for sale. Within just 2 weeks, I had 3 offers, one of them $20,000 above asking price. I accepted without hesitation, without a trace of regret. To me, that house no longer symbolized independence. It had become a battlefield, a place soaked with too many tears and endless conflict. Holding the check in my hands, I felt the weight of a chapter close, messy, painful, but necessary, because it was the chapter that taught me how to stand up. A month later, I packed my belongings into the car and drove straight to Tucson, Arizona. The city rested quietly among rugged, sun-baked mountains, with a sky so vividly blue it felt endless, and sunlight that poured like gold over every street. I had taken a new position at my company's Arizona branch, a step I embraced as both a fresh start for my career and for my life. No more relentless phone calls, no more scrutinizing eyes. I was beginning again from zero, but with the mindset of someone who was finally, completely free. A year passed, and I had built a life I once only dared to dream of. 6 months in, I was promoted to branch manager after the projects I led surpassed expectations. I had a team of colleagues who respected me as their leader, never shoving me into the role of lesser one or burden bearer. Most unexpectedly, I began dating Michael, a systems engineer whose quiet kindness often caught me off guard. He respected my boundaries to a degree that sometimes astonished me. He never pressed when I wasn't ready to share, never demanded, never forced. He simply stayed, listened, and let me be myself. My new house in Tucson was smaller than the one in Katy, but every corner carried my touch. I planted a backyard garden, tomatoes, basil, rosemary, and a neat row of strawberry plants. Every morning, I stepped outside, picked a few fresh basil leaves, dropped them into my tea, and felt a calmness settle over me. On the walls, I hung paintings I had chosen myself, no one to tell me the colors didn't match or that it looked strange. I painted the front door navy blue, the color I had loved since childhood but was never allowed to pick when I lived under my parents' roof. Every small detail from the tablecloth to the bedroom lamp to the armchair by the window stood as living proof of one truth: this was my home, and no one else's. On my 31st birthday, I hosted a small gathering at my home. There were no parents, no Vanessa, no judgmental eyes. Instead, my living room was filled with laughter from my new circle of friends, coworkers, neighbors, and a few close companions I'd met in Arizona. Elaine brought a box of apple pie, the kind I actually love, so different from the chocolate cake I had been forced to eat throughout my childhood because Vanessa likes it. Sophia, my next-door neighbor, arrived with a bottle of red wine, and Michael surprised me with a pot of lavender in full bloom, its purple flowers glowing in the afternoon light. As everyone gathered around the dining table, I raised my glass, looking around at the room glowing with warmth and the faces smiling back at me. My voice trembled slightly but carried a deep emotion. To the homes we build with our own hands, and to the families we choose. Cheers erupted, glasses clinked, and I felt my throat tighten with happiness. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet again, I sat by the window, gazing at the little garden under the moonlight. For a moment, I wondered, would there ever come a day when I might reconnect with my parents and Vanessa? Would the distance between us ever cool enough for me to return, even in some small way, without being dragged back into the old cycle? The question lingered, unanswered. But then I looked around my home, touched the dining table where my friends had just been laughing, and I smiled. I didn't need the answer right now. In this moment, I had a career, I had friends, I had a relationship blooming into something steady, and above all, I had freedom, the very thing I had yearned for my whole life. I was free, I was at peace, and for the first time ever, I knew I was truly living for myself.